The Harlem Renaissance, a cultural awakening. The Black experience in America has been an odyssey of tragedy, triumph, defeat, and discovery. But nothing was as impactful as the Harlem Renaissance. This video will cover how the Harlem Renaissance redefined not only Black culture, but how it impacted the world. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. The Harlem Renaissance stands as a beacon of artistic and intellectual achievement within the African American community during the early 20th century. Emerging against the backdrop of racial segregation and socio-political upheaval, this cultural movement in Harlem, New York, represented a profound awakening of African American identity and creativity. In this comprehensive exploration, we will delve into the rich tapestry of the Harlem Renaissance, examining its historical context, key figures, artistic expressions, social impact, and enduring legacy. To understand the Harlem Renaissance, we must first contextualize it within the broader historical landscape of the early 20th century. The Great Migration was a significant demographic movement of African Americans from the rural southern United States to the urban North, Midwest, and West between the early 20th century and the 1970s. This migration represented one of the largest internal migrations in American history and had profound social, economic, and cultural implications for both African American and American society as a whole. Up until the end of the Civil War, a large population of African Americans were enslaved. During the Reconstruction era, the emancipated African Americans began to strive for civic participation, political equality, and economic and cultural self-determination. Now free, but mostly still living in the South, Blacks still faced harsh discrimination and predatory policies like sharecropping and Jim Crow. Most Southern politicians were former slave owners or proponents of chattel slavery. In the South, African Americans faced harsh segregation, racial violence, and economic exploitation under the Jim Crow laws. Sharecropping, tenant farming, and discriminatory labor practices limited their opportunities for economic advancement and social mobility. Additionally, the boll weevil infestation in southern cotton fields in the early 20th century exacerbated poverty and unemployment among African American agricultural workers. But by the end of World War I, African Americans began to seek out a better life en masse. Between 1916 and 1970, an estimated 6 million African Americans migrated from the South to urban centers in the North and West in what is known as the Great Migration. Cities such as Chicago, Detroit, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and New York City experienced dramatic increases in their African American populations, and a 1-mile radius of Upper Manhattan was fertile ground for creativity and innovation, and became a crucible for African American artistic and intellectual expression. Even though the Great Migration brought thousands of Black Americans to New York City, they had already begun setting up enclaves prior to the end of the war. Harlem became an African American neighborhood in the early 1900s. In 1910, a large block along 135th Street and 5th Avenue was bought by various African American realtors and a church group. Many more African Americans arrived during the First World War. Due to the war, the migration of laborers from Europe virtually ceased, while the war effort resulted in a massive demand for unskilled industrial labor. Initially deemed the New Negro movement, the Harlem Renaissance began to gather folks' attention through mainstream plays that rejected racist stereotypes. Plays like Granny Mamie and The Writer of Dreams helped combat blackface and minstrel show traditions. Instead, these plays showcased African American actors conveying complex human emotions and yearnings. These early creative outbursts were considered some of the most important events in the entire history of the Negro in the American theater. At the heart of the Harlem Renaissance were the writers and poets who stood at the zenith of flowering of the Negro literature. Their eyes were watching Harlem. Langston Hughes, often hailed as the poet laureate of Harlem, infused his poetry with the rhythms of jazz and blues, exploring themes of identity, pride, and resilience. Zora Neale Hurston, with her keen eye for folklore and dialect, brought the stories and traditions of the rural South to the forefront of American literature. Claude McKay, through his evocative poetry, challenged racial stereotypes and celebrated the beauty and resilience of the African American spirit. Langston Hughes played a pivotal role in shaping the cultural landscape of the era. Through his poetry, essays, and advocacy, Hughes emerged as one of the leading voices of the Harlem Renaissance, capturing the rhythms, struggles, and aspirations of African American life in the early 20th century. Through his work, Hughes celebrated the beauty, resilience, and complexity of African American culture, while challenging prevailing notions of race, identity, and equality. Hughes' poetry served as a powerful expression of the African American experience, capturing the joys, sorrows, and contradictions of life in Harlem and beyond. Hughes' poems, such as The Negro Speaks of Rivers, Mother to Son, and Harlem, Dream Deferred, explored themes of racial pride, social justice, and the quest for freedom, resonating with readers of all backgrounds and generations. One of Hughes's most enduring contributions to the Harlem Renaissance was his championing of the concept of the New Negro, a term coined by Elaine Cook to describe the new generation of African Americans who asserted their pride, dignity, and autonomy in the face of racial oppression. In addition to his literary contributions, Hughes played a key role in promoting the work of other African American writers like Zora Neale and Claude McKay. Zora Neale left an indelible mark on American literature and culture through her vibrant storytelling, key observations, and unapologetic celebration of African American life. She emerged as one of the most important voices of her generation, capturing the richness, complexity, and resilience of African American culture and identity in the early 20th century. Through her novels, short stories, plays, and folklore collections, Hurston helped to redefine the literary landscape of the Harlem Renaissance. One of Hurston's most significant contributions to the Harlem Renaissance was her portrayal of African American life in the rural South, particularly in her native Florida. Drawing on her own experiences growing up in Edenville, Florida, one of the first all-black towns in the United States, Hurston brought a unique perspective and authenticity to her writing. Her novels, such as Their Eyes Were Watching God and Jonah's Gourdvine, depicted the struggles, triumphs, and complexities of African American life in the South, exploring themes of love, identity, and self-discovery. In addition to her literary contributions, she was an active participant in the cultural and intellectual life of Harlem and willing collaborator with fellow writers. Hurston's friendships and professional relationships with other Harlem Renaissance figures helped to foster a sense of community and collaboration within the movement, as well as providing support and encouragement to emerging talents. Claude McKay, a Jamaican-born poet, novelist, and essayist, contributed to the movement's vibrant literary and cultural landscape with his powerful works that explored themes of race, identity, and social justice. He became deeply involved in the burgeoning Harlem Renaissance, a period of artistic and intellectual flourishing among African Americans in the 1920s and 1930s. Through his poetry, novels, and essays, McKay challenged prevailing notions of race and identity while advocating for social change and racial equality. One of McKay's most enduring contributions to the Harlem Renaissance was his poem, If We Must Die. Written in response to the racial violence and oppression faced by African Americans, it became a rallying cry for resistance and resilience, urging African Americans to stand up against injustice and oppression. The poem's defiant tone and call to arms resonated with readers, making it one of the most iconic works of the Harlem Renaissance. McKay's novel, Home to Harlem, published in 1928, was one of the first works of fiction to depict the lives of African Americans living in Harlem. The novel explored themes of the Great Migration, identity, and cultural expression, providing readers with a vivid and nuanced portrayal of African American life in the urban North. Home to Harlem became a bestseller and established McKay as a prominent voice in African American literature. The Maestro, the Empress, and the Black Pearl of Harlem. The Harlem Renaissance was not confined to the literary sphere. The movement ushered in new styles of music and art. Artists like Aaron Douglas, known for his striking murals and illustrations, captured the vibrancy and dynamism of Harlem life, while also addressing themes of social justice and cultural heritage. Meanwhile, jazz music, with its infectious rhythms and improvisational spirit, became the soundtrack of the Harlem Renaissance, providing a voice for African American experiences and aspirations. Icons such as Duke Ellington, Bessie Smith, and Louis Armstrong helped to popularize jazz and bring it to a global audience, cementing its status as a quintessentially American art form. Considered the maestro of the Harlem Renaissance, Duke Ellington was one of the most influential musicians of the 20th century. Through his innovative compositions, virtuosic performances, and transformative influence on jazz music, he left a permanent mark on the world. Born in Washington, D.C., Ellington rose to prominence during the Harlem Renaissance as the leader of the Duke Ellington Orchestra, one of the most celebrated and influential jazz ensembles of the era. Ellington helped to redefine the sound of jazz, elevate the status of African American musicians, and establish Harlem as a cultural epicenter of American music. Ellington's innovative approach to composition and orchestration pushed the boundaries of jazz music and expanded its artistic possibilities. His compositions, such as Mood Indigo, Take the A Train, and It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing, became instant classics and helped to define the sound of the Harlem Renaissance. His use of lush harmonies, intricate arrangements, and innovative instrumentation elevated jazz music to new heights of sophistication and elegance, earning him the nickname The Duke and solidifying his reputation as a musical genius. The Duke Ellington Orchestra helped to popularize jazz music and bring it to a wider audience. The orchestra's residency at Harlem's legendary Cotton Club exposed audiences to the vibrant rhythms and infectious melodies of jazz, while also providing a platform for African American musicians to showcase their talent and creativity. Ellington's charismatic stage presence, dynamic leadership, and virtuosic piano playing captivated audiences and earned him acclaim as one of the greatest band leaders of all time. The maestro also used his platform and influence to promote racial pride, cultural heritage, and artistic excellence within the African American community, challenging prevailing stereotypes and discrimination. One of Ellington's most enduring legacies is his role in shaping the cultural and social landscape of Harlem and the broader African American community. Through his music and activism, Ellington helped to establish Harlem as a cultural epicenter of American music, attracting musicians, artists, and audiences from around the world. From the maestro to the Empress, Bessie Smith. Miss Smith emerged as one of the most influential and iconic figures of the Harlem Renaissance, with her powerful voice, emotive performances, and groundbreaking recordings. She rose from humble beginnings to become one of the highest paid and most celebrated entertainers of her time, earning acclaim for her soulful renditions of blues classics and her fearless embrace of African American identity and expression. Bessie Smith attracted fans from all over the world to Harlem. With her rich, resonant voice and her ability to convey a range of emotions, Smith captivated listeners and earned a reputation as one of the greatest blues singers of all time. Her recordings, such as Downhearted Blues, St. Louis Blues, and Empty Bed Blues, became bestsellers and helped to establish the blues as a mainstream genre of American music, paving the way for future generations of blues artists and performers. Bessie Smith, along with trailblazing performing artists like Josephine Baker, were the reason the effects of the Renaissance stretched across the globe. With her exotic beauty, charismatic personality, and mesmerizing performances, the Black Pearl, Josephine Baker, captivated audiences and shattered racial barriers, becoming one of the first African American women to achieve international fame and success. Her performances at famed venues in Paris, where she danced semi-nude in a banana skirt, scandalized and fascinated audiences, while also challenging notions of racial and sexual propriety. At a time when racial segregation and discrimination were pervasive in American society, Smith and Baker's success as Black women in the entertainment industry was a powerful symbol of resilience, defiance, and achievement. The Apollo. As we touched on earlier, the Harlem Renaissance gained recognition through its stage plays. The performing arts provided a platform for African American actors, singers, and dancers to showcase their talent and creativity. Performers like Paul Robeson captivated audiences with their powerful artistic abilities. But there was one place that was born in Harlem during this time that would go on to birth several generations of African American superstars. Still following along? Make sure you hit that notification bell so you can hear more stories like this one. The Apollo Theater stands as an iconic symbol of African American culture and creativity, serving as a legendary stage that played a pivotal role in shaping the cultural landscape of the Harlem Renaissance. Located in the heart of Harlem, New York City, the Apollo Theater emerged as a vibrant hub of artistic expression, innovation, and community engagement during the 1920s and 1930s, providing a platform for African American performers, artists, and intellectuals to showcase their talents and celebrate their cultural heritage. As one of the premier Black venues for Black entertainers in the United States, the Apollo Theater hosted countless performances by legendary musicians and singers like Billie Holiday and Sarah Vaughan. Performers such as Ethel Waters, Bill Bojangles Robinson, and the Nicholas Brothers dazzled audiences with their talent and creativity, while comedians such as Maz Mabley and Red Fox brought laughter and joy to the stage. The Apollo Theater served as a gathering place for African Americans from all walks of life, providing a space where they could come together to celebrate their culture, share their experiences, and mobilize for social change. The Apollo extended its reach far beyond the zenith of the Harlem Renaissance and cemented itself as a platform for young Black artists. The theater provided opportunities for young African American performers to showcase their talents and pursue their dreams, offering amateur nights and talent showcases that launched the careers of countless artists, including Ella Fitzgerald, James Brown, the Jackson 5, Lauryn Hill, Steve Harvey, and Chris Tucker. An evolution of fashion. One of the greatest shifts in the history of the African American experience came through the dramatic turn in fashion during the Harlem Renaissance. It was a time of great experimentation. Black people sought to express their identity and challenge mainstream fashion trends. Their fashion became a reflection of the changing social and cultural attitudes of the time. Through this, they curated new styles that were both innovative and elegant. Women's fashion during the Harlem Renaissance was about a rejection of traditional gender roles. Black women went from the prim and proper, short skirts and silk stockings, to drop-waisted dresses. Women wore loose-fitted garments and accessorized with long-strand pearl bead necklaces, feather boas, and cigarette holders. The fashion of the Harlem Renaissance was used to convey elegance and flamboyancy, and needed to be created with the vibrant dance styles of the 1920s in mind. Men's fashion during the Harlem Renaissance was characterized by a return to elegance and refinement. Men wore tailored suits made from luxurious materials like silk and wool. They accessorized with fedoras and suspenders. This fashion renaissance also introduced the world to the zoot suit, which consisted of wide-legged, high-waisted, peg-top trousers and a long coat with padded shoulders and wide lapels. Men also wore wide-brimmed hats, colored socks, white gloves, and velvet collared Chesterfield coats. During this period, African Americans expressed respect for their heritage through a fad for leopard skin coats, indicating the power of the African animal. Harlem Renaissance fashion was all about bold colors, intricate patterns, and attention to detail. The fashion was a celebration of the creativity and innovation of African Americans. It paved the way for future generations of designers and fashion icons like Dapper Dan, Sergio Houston, and Faye Noel. The New Negro. Beyond its artistic achievements, the Harlem Renaissance had profound social and political implications. At its core was the concept of the New Negro, a term coined by Alain Cook and amplified by Langston Hughes to describe a new generation of African Americans who asserted their pride, dignity, and autonomy in the face of racial oppression. World War I created a transformation for African Americans from the old to the new. During the war, Black troops fought abroad to keep the world safe for democracy. They returned home determined to achieve a fuller participation in American society. The philosophy of the Civil Rights Movement shifted from the accommodationist approach to a more militant approach to self-determination. These forces converged to help create the New Negro movement of the 1920s, which promoted a renewed sense of racial pride, cultural self-expression, economic independence, and progressive politics. They carried this new aim as a group with them during the Great Migration, and it flourished in Harlem. Through their art and activism, Harlem Renaissance figures challenged prevailing notions of race and identity, paving the way for the Civil Rights Movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Harlem would become a hub for contributors to the fight for equality, like Madam C.J. Walker and W.E.B. Du Bois, and later Malcolm X. The Harlem Renaissance also served as a catalyst for broader cultural and intellectual movements, inspiring subsequent generations of artists, writers, and activists to continue the fight for social justice and equality. Legacy of the Renaissance. The legacy of the Harlem Renaissance endures to this day, leaving an indelible mark on American culture and society. Its influence can be seen in the work of contemporary artists, writers, and musicians who draw inspiration from the creativity and resilience of their predecessors. The Harlem Renaissance also serves as a reminder of the power of art and culture to affect social change and foster understanding across racial and cultural divides. As we reflect on the achievements of the Harlem Renaissance, we are reminded of the enduring spirit of resilience, creativity, and hope that continues to shape the African American experience and enrich the cultural fabric of our nation. Its influence can still be seen today in fashion, music, and Black pride, as African Americans look to the past for inspiration and how to go forward. The Harlem Renaissance represents a pivotal moment in American history, making a cultural renaissance and a celebration of African American identity and creativity. Against the backdrop of racial segregation and social injustice, Harlem became a beacon of hope and inspiration, giving rise to a generation of artists, writers, and thinkers who defied the odds and left an indelible mark on American culture. As we honor the achievements of the Harlem Renaissance, let us also reflect on its enduring legacy and the ongoing struggle for equality and justice in our society.